She said he was just a friend. That was the first lie. She waited until my son left for his trip, then handed the guest room key to someone who never looked like a guest. He moved like he belonged. She smiled like she'd gotten away with something. And I watched, quietly. There's a difference between silence and absence. I may be old, but this is my house, and no one crosses a line in my house without leaving footprints. So I made sure there were eyes in the room they thought was safe. And once the camera started rolling, the truth came faster than I expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone, but I kept the footage. And when the time was right, I used it. Like, share, and subscribe. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? They say you know your home better than anyone. I'd like to think that's true, not because I built it with my own hands, though I oversaw every beam, every wire, but because I designed it to see. Every corner, every shadow, every blind spot was placed with intention. The doors have weight. The windows frame more than views. They frame behavior. And every room with a lock? Only I hold the master override, not out of paranoia, out of principle. A house should protect its people, not just shelter them. So when my daughter-in-law, Camilla, gave a man a key to my guest room while my son was overseas, I knew it before the man had even unpacked his things. She told me over breakfast, voice light, fingers tapping the rim of her coffee cup like she was already rehearsing her alibi. Julian's just staying for a few nights. He's a close friend from college. She smiled like it was nothing. Casual? Convenient. Like she didn't know that I'd spent 30 years in corporate security watching liars say the same line with the same smirk, the same flicker in the eyes when they think they've sold the lie. I didn't say anything. I nodded, even offered him a drink the first evening. Bourbon, neat. The good bottle I keep for guests who don't deserve it. But I didn't believe a word. You see, my son Nathan had only been gone for 48 hours. He flew to Geneva for a long-standing business contract. He travels once a year, usually alone, always focused. Camilla never joins him. Says international trips make her anxious. She'll clutch her chest dramatically, say the time zones disrupt her energy. I never argued. Let her have her excuses. But this time, something was off. This time, she seemed too comfortable, too quickly. She didn't just look relaxed. She looked like she'd been waiting for something, or someone. There was a lightness in her step I hadn't seen in years, not even on their wedding day. And when she laughed that first night, really laughed, head tilted back, hand on Julian's arm, it wasn't the polite chuckle she gave Nathan when he told his dry jokes. It was intimate, unfiltered, like she'd finally exhaled after holding her breath for months. That same night, I noticed Julian walking around the guest wing barefoot, not tiptoeing like a guest trying not to disturb, not padding softly out of respect. No, he strode, shoulders loose, like he owned the hallway, like he'd walked it before. I stood at the top of the stairs, robe-tied, watching. The moonlight through the east window caught the silver in his hair, the way his toes curled against the oak floor. Confident, not like a visitor, like a man used to being somewhere he shouldn't be. The next morning I checked the monitor in my study. It wasn't running yet, but the clock in the guest room was exactly where I'd left it a decade ago, mounted just left of the window, its brass face catching the dawn. That clock was more than sentimental. My late wife picked it out on our 20th anniversary. Time should be beautiful, she'd said, but I had other ideas. I'd had it custom modified. Inside the frame, nestled against the inner curve, was a pinhole lens no bigger than a shirt button wired to a silent recorder in my study. Never activated, never needed. Until now, I hadn't touched it in years, didn't need to, but some instincts never retire. They sleep, they wait. So I turned it back on. From that moment forward, I stopped asking questions. I let them act like I wasn't watching. They had wine with dinner, her favorite Pinot, the one Nathan buys by the case but never drinks. He called her Cam. She laughed louder than she ever did with my son. a sound that rang too bright in the quiet house. Still, I had no evidence. No contact, no confession, just proximity, tone, familiarity, and yet those are the first cracks in any structure. They tell you what's coming before the roof ever falls in. I've seen empires crumble over less. A glance held too long, a hand, brushing a shoulder by accident, the way someone leans into a space that isn't theirs. That evening, she made a point to tell me she'd be turning in early. He stayed in the kitchen, pouring another glass, swirling it like he had all the time in the world. I heard footsteps in the hallway. 2 sets. One paused at the guest room. The other followed seconds later, slower, deliberate. I sat in my study in silence, the monitor dark. Didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Because I wasn't just watching for proof. I was watching how far they were willing to go when they thought no one could see them. That's where truth lives. Not in grand gestures, but in the small, unguarded moments when people believe they're alone. By the 3rd day, I had enough for suspicion. By the 5th, I had enough for truth. But I didn't confront her. I didn't tell Nathan. I waited. Because timing matters more than rage. Rage is fire. It burns fast and leaves ash. But patience is water. It carves stone. And I wasn't angry. Not yet. I don't think Camilla ever noticed that the old clock in the guest room didn't tick. Most people assume silence means something is broken, but in my house, silence means control. That clock was never meant to tell time. It was meant to record it. And now it was working harder than it ever had, its lens drinking in every movement, every whisper, every lie wrapped in laughter. Every morning I poured my coffee, black, 1 sugar, and sat in the study, the screen glowing softly in the pre-dawn gray. And there he was, Julian, wandering shirtless down the hallway, like it was his own home, cooking breakfast in my kitchen with my eggs, humming some tune I didn't recognize. Once, just once, he kissed her on the shoulder while she was rinsing dishes, his lips lingering a beat too long, his hand resting low on her hip. Quick, familiar, confident, like it was routine. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. There it was, proof, but I didn't save the clip, not yet. I wanted to see how far it would go, not out of cruelty but clarity. I needed to know who she was when no one was supposed to be watching. Not just what she did, but how she did it. Was this a fling, a mistake born of loneliness? Or had this been planned long before Nathan boarded his plane? On the 4th night, I found out. They sat in the guest room, not the living room. Door half closed, a sliver of warm light spilling into the hall. A bottle of red wine between them, 2 glasses on the nightstand. She'd rested her legs across his lap like she'd done it 1,000 times, bare feet tucked under his thigh. He leaned in and said something. Then she laughed and looked away like a woman caught in a guilty pleasure, except there was no guilt, none. Her eyes sparkled with relief, like a weight had lifted. That's when I realized it wasn't an accident. It wasn't impulsive. This was routine. Julian had been here before. Maybe not this house. But her? This? Their little ritual? It had history. The ease between them wasn't new. It was practiced, rehearsed, lived in, and now I had all of it on record. Still, I waited, because evidence without strategy is just noise. I began to log their patterns like I used to log security breaches. When he left the room, when she brought him food, the way she checked the hallway before entering, all was on edge until the door shut behind her. I logged their laughter, the shared glances, and how they stopped pretending the moment they thought they were alone. The way he'd stretch his arm across the back of the couch, casual ownership, the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear. When he looked at her, a gesture I'd never seen her use with Nathan. I even noticed small things, how Julian never took his shoes into the guest room. That meant he expected to stay, that he wasn't visiting. He was nesting. It made me sick. Not in the way betrayal stings in the chest, but in the way it settles into your bones. cold, familiar. Like I'd seen this before in boardrooms and contracts, people who smile while they steal, who thank you as they dismantle your life. Camilla wasn't just cheating. She was repositioning herself, building a new future in the shell of the old one, using my son's absence and my hospitality as scaffolding. I checked Nathan's email itinerary. He had 5 days left overseas, 5 days before he returned home, and walked into the lie she was building. If I said something too soon, she'd deny it, spin it, maybe even gaslight him. I knew how persuasive she could be, how her voice softened when she was lying, how her eyes welled up on command. She'd say Julian was just a friend going through a hard time, that I was overreacting because I'm lonely since Mom passed. But a camera? A camera doesn't cry. It doesn't explain or spin. It just shows. That was what I needed. I backed up the recordings onto a private encrypted drive, locked it in my safe just beneath my father's old .38 revolver, not loaded, never used, but always there. Not for violence, for balance. A reminder that some boundaries, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. The next morning, Camilla told me Julian would be leaving in a day or two. Interesting timing. Right before Nathan's return, I smiled over my coffee. That's probably for the best. She smiled back, warm and easy, like she thought I had no idea. But I had her timeline. I had her pattern. And most importantly, I had her on camera. Now I just needed the perfect moment to show Nathan who he'd married. I've lived long enough to know the difference between a polite smile and a smile that doesn't belong. Camilla had the latter. She wore it like perfume, invisible, but always lingering in the air long after she left the room. It was the kind of smile that doesn't match the moment. Not when your husband is overseas, not when you've got a stranger sleeping down the hall. On the 6th day, she made French toast. Not the frozen kind, not the lazy version either. Real French toast, soaked in egg and vanilla, fried in butter until golden, dusted with powdered sugar, the way Nathan likes it, the way I taught her to. Make it years ago when she first moved in and wanted to impress him. Except Nathan wasn't home. Julian was. And I watched from the study as she plated it for him, cut the crusts, something Nathan never asked for, but she remembered anyway. Even added strawberries on top, sliced just so. Small things, intimate things. Things Nathan never noticed, but I always did. She leaned on the counter with her elbow, sipping coffee while he ate in the kitchen shirtless, sunlight catching the stubble on his jaw, like this was some quiet honeymoon weekend. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. "Oh, good morning," she said brightly. "Made extra if you're hungry." "No thanks," I said, glancing at the plate. "Didn't know you were such a fan of strawberries." She blinked just for a second, too fast for most to catch, but not for me. Then smiled that same misplaced smile and turned back to her mug. I'm full of surprises. I walked out without another word. Later that day I checked the footage again, and there it was, her wiping the corner of his mouth with her thumb, laughing like the world owed them privacy. A gesture so tender, so automatic, it could only come from repetition. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a replacement. She wasn't missing Nathan while he was gone. She was building a life without him, in his father's house, using his father's generosity as cover. The gall of it would have made some men explode, but I didn't, because rage is loud, and I've learned that truth, when delivered quietly, lands 10 times harder. That evening, Julian left for a few hours. He said something about checking in at a hotel to keep his official check-in on record. Clever, but not clever enough. I listened from the hallway, my back against the wall, silent as shadow. When the door closed behind him, I saw Camilla walk straight into the guest room and breathe, not cry, not reflect, just breathe, deep, slow, like she finally had the space to be herself again. I'd seen that look once before, After my wife died, I found a photo of her in the garden, taken without her knowledge by a neighbor. She was kneeling in the soil, gloves stained with earth, hair loose, completely unaware the camera had caught her in that moment of peace, the only time she ever looked truly free. That's what Camilla looked like in the guest room that night. Comfortable. Only this time, comfort didn't mean safety, it meant evidence. That night, I saved the footage, time-stamped it, and printed stills from the clearest frames, one with his. Hand resting on the small of her back as they stood by the window, one with her pouring wine into their glasses, her ring glinting in the lamplight, Nathan's ring. One with their heads leaning too close during a whispered joke, foreheads almost touching. Each photo was slipped into a plain manila envelope, labeled only with the date. I left it on my desk, beneath the letter I'd written 3 days earlier, a letter addressed to Nathan. One he wasn't meant to read unless I couldn't speak the truth out loud, hospitalized, gone, silenced, just in case, because life doesn't always give you the time to say what needs saying. But paper listens, and at this point I wasn't just preparing for confrontation, I was preparing for protection. Not of myself, but of my son's dignity, and the legacy this house was supposed to represent, a place of honesty, of loyalty, of things built to last. Camilla didn't know what I knew. She didn't know who I was before I was a father, before I was a husband. She didn't know I once dismantled a $200 million fraud ring by watching a man blink too slowly during a deposition, and she definitely didn't know what I was capable of when someone played games in my house. Some people mistake stillness for weakness. They think silence means you're not paying attention. But silence is where I've done my best work. And Camilla had no idea I'd spent decades being the quietest man in every room while knowing the most. Julian returned late that night, reeking of cologne and smoke. Not the kind that comes from a cigarette, but the kind that lingers from bars with low lighting, sticky floors, and late choices made in dim corners. Camilla let him in through the side door, the one with the faulty latch I never fixed because it made too much noise. Perfect for listening. She didn't even check to see if I was still awake. I was, and I watched from the top of the staircase as they disappeared down the hallway, their shadows merging on the wall, like ink in water. No words, no whispers, just hands, hers on his chest, his on her waist, pulling each other into the guest room like gravity. At 2:13 a.m., the monitor blinked awake. The guest room lights came on, just the bedside lamp casting long shadows. The covers moved, and I didn't look away. Not because I wanted to see, but because I needed to know exactly what they thought they were doing when no one was looking. The arrogance of it, the entitlement. By morning, they acted like the house hadn't recorded every lie they shared. Camilla offered me coffee, her hair still damp from the shower, her expression clean and polite, like nothing had happened. Didn't. "Sleep well?" she asked casually, stirring honey into her cup. I met her eyes over the rim of my mug. No, actually, I slept perfectly. She hesitated, just long enough for me to see it, that flicker of doubt, the spark of fear that maybe, just maybe, I'd seen something she didn't want seen. But then she smiled again, that same misplaced smile, brittle at the edges. Later that day I printed new stills. This time, nothing ambiguous, nothing left to interpretation. Julian's hand under the blanket, fingers tracing her spine. Camilla's head on his chest, eyes closed, utterly at peace. The timestamp glowing in the corner like a verdict. I sealed the images in a new envelope, initialed the back with my old security clearance mark. ER locked it beside the first set in the safe. Then I checked the calendar. Nathan would be home in 2 days. And they had no idea the walls were closing in. That afternoon, I went into town under the pretense of a supply run. Batteries, light bulbs, the usual. While there, I visited the local jeweler, a man I've known since he was a boy, sweeping floors in his father's shop. I asked him to reset a vintage ring from my late wife's collection, a small, elegant platinum band with a single diamond, Worn smooth from decades of love. Nothing flashy, just true. "Anniversary?" he asked, polishing the setting. "Something like that," I said. I picked it up 2 hours later and returned home quietly, the box cool in my coat pocket. When I walked into the house, Camilla was on the phone in the garden, pacing the stone path my wife laid by hand, her voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. "He's suspicious. Just act normal." "Yeah, I know." No, I didn't tell him. "He's old, Cam. He's paranoid. He doesn't know anything." "He's old." The words landed like stones. She saw me when she turned, waved like everything was fine, tucking the phone away with practiced ease. I waved back. Inside, I set the ring box on my study desk, next to the 2 envelopes, 3 artifacts, 3 truths, 3 pieces of a storm I wasn't going to unleash, not yet, because Camilla's mistake wasn't just infidelity, it was assuming I wouldn't protect my son. It was thinking I would sit quietly and let her write the next chapter in our family's story with a man who didn't belong in the margins. No, I was going to let her think everything was safe. Until Nathan walked through the door and saw the house exactly how she'd left it, perfumed with lies, staged with care, waiting to collapse. And then, without a single raised voice, the truth would speak for itself. Nathan's flight landed just after noon. I knew because I'd tracked it through the airline's public feed. Old habits die hard. I never liked surprises, not when something this fragile was about to crack wide open. Camilla spent the morning cleaning, not the kind of cleaning you do for guests, the kind you do when you want to erase guilt. Fresh linens in the guest room, crisp, white, smelling of lavender. Wine glasses scrubbed spotless and returned to the cabinet. Even the framed photo of her and Nathan from their honeymoon in Santorini, oddly absent all week, was suddenly back on the mantel, angled just so. Julian had left the night before, bags packed. No goodbye, no thank you for staying in my house either. Just vanished like he was never here. But I had him, in frame after frame, sleeping in a bed that didn't belong to him beside a woman who belonged to someone else. I let her play her part. She stood at the door, smoothing her dress, checking her lipstick twice in the hall mirror. Even practiced a smile, soft, welcoming, relieved. I watched her do it from the study doorway, unseen, and I waited in the study, ring box on my desk, envelope sealed and ready. When Nathan's car pulled into the driveway, I didn't greet him. I wanted to see how she would. I heard her call out, fake joy in every syllable. "Baby, you're home." She hugged him tight, kissed his cheek, took his bag like she'd missed him every second. He believed it. Of course he did. When you're in love, you see what you want to see. They walked inside and made small talk. Flight delays, traffic, something about the meeting in Zurich falling through. She offered him coffee. He declined. Said he needed a shower first. Smelled like stale airplane air. That's when she peeked into my study, hair still perfect, smile still in place. "He's home," she said lightly. I noticed. She smiled again. And for the first time, I didn't smile back. That stopped her cold. There it was again, that flicker of doubt, the shift in her posture, shoulders tightening. She knew I knew. She just didn't know how much. Later that evening, we all sat down for dinner. Roast chicken, her famous garlic potatoes, the kind of meal she only makes when she's trying to prove something. I didn't say a word. Nathan caught up on his trip. Camilla nodded, played the attentive wife, refilling his water, laughing at his stories, but her hands were tense. She barely ate. Nathan didn't notice, but I did. The next morning, I invited him to the study. I asked him to close the door. He looked surprised, but didn't ask why. I opened the drawer, pulled out the 2 envelopes, laid them on the table, then the ring box. He frowned, brow furrowing. "What's all this?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured us both a finger of bourbon, the good bottle. "Before you open anything, just know this." I didn't want to believe it either. He looked at the envelopes, his fingers hesitating. "Is this about Camilla I nodded once. She told me Julian was just a friend. So I installed a camera. Guest room clock. His eyes widened, then narrowed. You spied on her? I protected you. He reached for the envelopes. Opened the first. Saw the photos. Her laughing. His hand on her back. The intimacy in their posture. Didn't say a word. He opened the second. Saw the bed. The covers. The timestamp. His face dropped. Not into tears, but into something worse. Quiet devastation. A deep silence filled the room, thick as fog. When he looked up, he didn't look broken. He looked betrayed in a way I wouldn't wish on anyone, and still, he didn't raise his voice, didn't cry. That's when I knew he was my son. She did all this while I was gone? I nodded again, then slid the ring box forward. I don't know what this means to you, I said, but I want you to have it. It belonged to your mother. He opened it. Inside was the ring. She'd worn every day of her life, simple, solid, unshakable. She'd want you to remember what real commitment looks like. He held the ring like it burned. Then he stood up and walked out of the study without another word. And I didn't follow because the truth was finally out, and now it was Nathan's turn to decide what came next. Nathan didn't say a word to me for the rest of the morning, not out of anger, out of processing. He walked the length of the house 3 times, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. Then he stopped at the guest room door, hand on the knob as if testing its reality. It was spotless. Bed made, pillows aligned, like no one had ever slept in it. But that's the thing about memories, they don't get washed out with sheets. He stood there for a moment, then turned and called for her. Camilla. She appeared from the living room, voice light and rehearsed, book in hand, like she'd been reading all morning. Hey, want to go out for lunch? He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not the woman he loved, but the woman she'd become, carefully constructed, beautifully false. Can we talk? He asked. She tilted her head, smile faltering just slightly. Of course. He led her into the guest room. I watched from the top of the stairs, not listening, just observing the way her shoulders stiffened as the door closed behind them. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then I heard it. The voice. Her voice. I can, explain. I didn't hear his response, but I didn't need to, because the word explain only comes after the damage is done. When they finally emerged, Camilla's eyes were red, but there were no tears on her cheeks, just smudged mascara. Hastily wiped, Nathan looked calm, dangerously calm. He didn't touch her, didn't reach for her hand. He just said, voice low and final, pack your things, and walked away. She stood frozen in the hallway, stunned, like the script she'd memorized had just been ripped from her hands. That night, she didn't sleep in the master bedroom. She didn't sleep at all. I know because I saw her shadow pass the hallway light a dozen times, pacing, pausing, turning back. She knocked on my study door once, around 1 a.m. Didn't say anything when I opened it, just stood there, wrapped in Nathan's old college sweatshirt, another calculated choice. I waited. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, voice trembling. I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had shared my table, my home, my son's life. I know exactly what you meant it to do, she looked down, fingers twisting the hem of the sweatshirt. I'm sorry, I nodded slowly. You're not sorry. You're caught. She didn't deny it, didn't argue, just left. The next morning she was gone. Suitcase, jewelry case. Nothing else, no goodbye, no note, just silence. Nathan didn't speak much that day either. He spent most of it walking the property, alone, thinking, past the old oak where he proposed to her, past the garden bench where his mother used to read. When he came inside that evening, he found me at the kitchen table, sorting through mail. He sat across from me. I thought I knew her, he said, voice rough. You knew who she wanted you to see. He nodded, then pulled out the ring box I'd given him. I'm not ready to let this go yet. You don't have to, I said. He closed the box gently, then said something I didn't expect. Thank you for watching when I didn't. I looked at my son, a man finally awake in a house that nearly betrayed him, and I knew the storm had passed, not because we'd shouted, not because we'd fought, but because the truth had done all the work for us. The silence after she left wasn't empty, it was earned. The guest room stayed untouched for weeks, not because we were hiding from what happened, but because sometimes the best way to honor a hard truth is to let it echo a while, to let the air clear of her perfume, her laughter, her lies. Nathan didn't ask me for details. He didn't ask to watch the footage. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough. Instead, he got quieter, focused, more like himself again, but changed in the way a man changes when he's been burned and walked away still standing, stronger at the broken places. I caught him one afternoon in the garden, turning the soil over by hand, planting new lavender where his mother's had faded. Same spot, same rhythm. He didn't say a word about it, but he didn't need to. That's when I knew he wasn't broken, he was rebuilding, and for the first time in a long time, this house felt like it belonged to us again. Not a stage for performance, not a place for secrets, a home. Camilla never came back. For her things, I had them boxed, neatly, respectfully, left them in storage, just in case, though I knew she wouldn't return. People like her don't look back. She never called, never emailed. Her silence was the most honest thing she'd ever given us. And Julian? I doubt he ever realized just how exposed he was. I considered sending him a copy of the footage once, not to threaten, just to remind him that some houses see everything, and some men never forget, but I didn't. Because this wasn't about revenge for me, it was about protection. Nathan eventually filed for divorce. No drama, just a clean, surgical separation. He hired a lawyer I recommended, the kind who didn't flinch, and the settlement? Minimal. She got what she came with, nothing more. She didn't fight. I think somewhere deep down, she knew she'd lost more than money. She'd lost access to something she never understood, the kind of man who builds a life with purpose, who loves with his whole self, who trusts until shown otherwise. A few weeks later, I found the ring box again in my desk drawer. I almost put it back in the safe, but something told me to leave it out. So I placed it in the hallway cabinet, where we used to keep spare candles and photo albums, next to the picture of Nathan as a boy, grinning with a muddy dog in his arms, because maybe someday it'll mean something again, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what we kept, the guest room. Clock still hangs on the wall. It no longer records, but I kept the camera inside, not because I'm suspicious, because history deserves to be remembered. Some people build legacies through noise, through wealth, titles, names on buildings, but the strongest legacies? They're built in the quiet, in the moments where you choose to protect instead of punish, to observe instead of explode, to stay silent and still win. Camilla tried to rewrite this house. She failed because I was watching. And I will always protect what's mine, like share and subscribe if you believe silence is sometimes the loudest justice. Have you ever caught someone lying without saying a word? Comment below. Now I'm reading every story.